Star Wars 7x7, episode 2601. So, there have been signs that a clone rebellion will be coming to season 2 of The Bad Batch. There were a couple of earlier indications in season 1, and the finale of The Bad Batch included what I would say is, well, third time's a charm. That made me think, yeah, this is probably going to be a big thing, and we'll talk about it today. Punch it. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy. Thank you so much for joining me for it. So, the notion of clones fighting against the Empire, this is actually not a new one. This is something that happened in Legends, and the way it happened in Legends, we'll talk about a little bit later in this episode. But to lay the groundwork for what I said at the top, the notion that we've been given indications of the possibility of a clone rebellion to come, first indication of that has to do with the situation on Ryloth. And as you'll recall, that was one of the things that kind of made it clear that Order 66 really just applied to the Jedi, but not necessarily to serving the Empire. And so in that episode, or in that 2-episode story arc, toward the end of it, we see the Bad Batch convince Hauser that you're working for the Empire is not the way to go. This is not where his real loyalties should lie. It's not what they were working for as clones, and he was already having difficulty with the Imperial occupation of Ryloth to begin with, and his relationship with the Syndulas certainly helped him along that path. But toward the end of that story arc with Rescue on Ryloth, he actually made an appeal to his fellow clone troopers to say, what we're doing here is wrong. You don't have to do this. Like, lay down your arms. Like, don't help the Empire. And so a bunch of them just gave up and surrendered to the Empire, which not necessarily the greatest thing. Like, you'd rather have them be able to fight against the Empire, but what are you gonna do? So that's the first instance. The second instance comes in War Mantle, which was episode 14, where we meet Gregor, and we've talked about Gregor here on the show, of course. Gregor was defecting from the Empire because he saw what the whole War Mantle situation was going to be, and he was like, no, I don't want any part of this. Not because he was like, oh yeah, this seems boring or anything, but because he saw what the Empire was becoming, and he was like, no, can't do it. This does not line up with what I believe in. And we know where Gregor's loyalties ultimately lie, because he of course shows up in Rebels along with Wolf and Rex, right? It's definitely a very anti-Empire mentality. So the third one happened in the last episode of the season, Kamino Lost, and I'll draw your attention to the scene where the bombardment is happening, and then we go back onto Rampart's ship, and a clone trooper walks up to him, and Rampart asks for a status report. And I'm going to play you that clip, and just pay attention to the way that D. Bradley Baker, as that clone trooper, delivers his line. Here we go.
Status report.
The cities have been destroyed, sir. All Kaminoan facilities have collapsed into the sea.
Very good.
All right, did you hear it? Did you hear the pauses and the heavy breaths that were a part of that line delivery, right? The clone just walked up. He wasn't, running upstairs or anything like that prior to arriving at Admiral Rampart's side. No, that is the voice of a very despondent, dejected, emotionally hurt clone trooper. And you have to remember that the clones view Kamino as their homeworld. There's a thing where, if you look on Wikipedia about Kamino, there's a quote that leads off the reference on Wikipedia where it's Rex talking to Obi-Wan Kenobi to the effect of, if somebody's coming after our homeworld, they better come with a big blaster. And there's no mistaking the fact that the Empire just laid waste to the cities on Kamino. I mean, yeah, period, paragraph, end of story. This is the kind of thing that will get out, and the clone troopers will spread this information amongst themselves, and it is not going to go over well at all. We already have instances of clones deciding that they've had enough of the Empire, like pretty much right away. Like, this doesn't take place long after the fall of the Republic, the Bad Batch Season 1. So, I mean, it's not taking very long. And something like Kamino, yeah, that's going to be a flashpoint situation where, the news of it is going to spread like wildfire among the clones, and there's no way that they're not going to see mass defections at the very least, and even worse for the Empire, seeing a whole clone force rising up against them. And, not to get too negative about it, but not like it's going to end up mattering really, because we know how the story rolls out. The Empire is still going to be going strong for nearly 2 decades. So obviously, if this happens, it's not going to really affect the Empire overall. But yeah, it's still going to be a big deal that we will see play out in Season 2. The other thing I wanted to flag for you, and that has to do with the Kaminoans being relocated and their cloning facilities being, captured, the technology being captured and transferred off-world, and the Kaminoan scientists being put to work in some fashion. We don't know the details of it yet, per se, but in Legends, Kaminoans got unhappy with what the Empire did to them and created clones in secret that were even, more powerful than the existing clones that they had made previously, and they were very anti-Empire clones. But according to Wikipedia, the story goes that Darth Vader got wind of it, and working with the 501st and led by Boba Fett of all people, they eradicated these additional clones that the Kaminoans made in secret. So sadly, that didn't work out. I suppose there's a possibility that they could pursue that kind of storyline for Season 2 of the Bad Batch, but I think probably the way that they're going so far, what they've set up, is certainly the idea that clones would just find the destruction of Kamino abhorrent, and that would be enough to rise up against the Empire. And so there you go. That's what I've got for you on the possibilities that the fine folks at the Bad Batch have set up a clone rebellion as a potential future storyline based on what we've seen so far in Season 1 of the Bad Batch. And that is going to do it for this episode of the show as well. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.